Welcome back, everyone. I recently went to the Museum of Failure, which is an exhibit that covers products that didn't quite hit the mark throughout history. Since we like to chat about product design on this channel, I thought it'd be fun to show you guys some of the items that were featured at the museum, and also why they probably didn't end up succeeding, so that we can learn from others' past mistakes as we work on our own designs. Too good for its own good. Sometimes products succeed in one area, but they fail in others. In the example of the Petty Perfect, it was actually a super effective product at removing calluses for users. But if you've used similar items like shavers before, you'll know that much of the profit actually comes from purchasing refillable blades or cartridges. And in this case, the product was so good that users didn't really have to buy refills often. So while the usability was excellent, it unfortunately didn't quite meet business objectives. Do no harm. This may seem obvious, but if you want a product to be successful, maybe try not to harm or kill your users. The Rely tampons were so absorbent that people were under the impression that they could leave it in for much longer, resulting in toxic shock syndrome, which is a life-threatening complication from a bacterial infection. And that's actually part of the reason why tampon manufacturers today have to issue warning labels about the dangers of TSS. Apparently, this Rejuvenique facial mask was as painful as it looks. A fellow museum patron next to me remarked that it appears to be a torture device. It also reminds me of that Office episode with the CPR dummy. If you know, you know. These lawn darts were marketed for kids, but one look at it should tell you that maybe chucking a bunch of really heavy objects is a bad idea, even for adults. Unfortunately, it did take the lives of a few children before the product was finally recalled. For the Cabbage Patch Kid, the idea was cute, a doll that can actually munch on toy food. Except, as someone who has held a baby before or has used a hairdryer, I can speak from personal experience that you don't want to take chances at letting your hair near things that will simply not let go. So perhaps more thorough usability testing could have been done here. Speaking of marketing to youngins, Four Loko became a staple at many college parties for anyone who wanted to get real messed up for cheap. Eventually, they had to remove caffeine from its formula for public safety reasons. Hopefully, it's no longer trendy to keep blacking out. The Trabant has been called the worst car ever produced. It had no seatbelts, no fuel gauge, no turn signal, maxed out at 60 miles per hour, and released a ton of smoke. Amazingly, since the 50s, this car went on for another 3 decades without improving upon its design. I suppose it is possible to get away with little to no iteration and still be a commercial success, but it'll still catch up to you eventually. Another mode of transportation that didn't fare too well was the Segway. It's actually still around today, but when was the last time you saw someone using it who wasn't part of a tour or in the cast of Arrested Development? Honestly, when it comes to safety, it's not that much worse than if you were to use an e-scooter without a helmet, which is to say that both can be quite dangerous. But it was also super bulky and cost a small fortune at $5,000 a pop. Negativity bias. There's a phenomenon known as negativity bias, where users are more affected by negative experiences than positive ones. In the case of Blockbuster, a good chunk of their profits came from charging late fees. So when Netflix came along and offered no more late fees, well, they knew how to tap into that cognitive bias, and the rest is history. Overpromise, underdeliver. Oftentimes, the idea of a product is far better than the end result. If you're a gamer, you've probably heard of Cyberpunk 2077, a game that has been hyped up for years and even had Keanu Reeves promoting it. When it was released, there were so many glitches like objects disappearing, people being able to drive right through structures, or placeholder text still being visible. Looking back now, it's actually pretty hilarious, but the people who had pre-ordered it were pretty frustrated and demanded refunds. Another really public controversy involved the Fire Festival, which was a music festival promoted by supermodels that promised a luxurious experience. But what the attendees got instead was a sad box meal as depicted here, with no toilets or beds. It gets way worse, but to find out more you can watch the popular Netflix documentary that covers the event. And you may know of the Theranos scandal, or at least heard of the name of its founder, Elizabeth Holmes. The company promised rapid, accurate, affordable, and less painful blood tests that could be readily accessible by everyday consumers. Sounds great, but turns out that this was actually too good to be true and the claims were debunked. Healthcare is usually especially scrutinized for patient safety, or at least you would hope that's consistently the case. The reality of that, well, that'll be opening another can of worms. Over-reliance on the brand. There are also products where the product was most definitely the brand, and not so much the item that they were pushing. It sometimes happens in gaming, where the design and the play mechanics aren't well thought out, but the idea was just to promote some other thing. The E.T. Atari game is often called the worst game of all time for those reasons. Not surprising, as development was rushed to promote the film. There's a section in the museum where you can play a bunch of different games, so we were able to experience the frustration firsthand. There was also an entire area dedicated to Trump's products, ranging from his books, his so-called university, water, steak, and a board game. Now there's a guy who likes to put his name on everything, but it turns out trying to leverage perceived luxury doesn't work out well in all scenarios. I like to think that for Trump's steaks, at least, part of the reason why it failed is because it was being sold at sharper image. No user research. Then there's a category where I suspect no user research had been carried out, or as I like to call it, did you even talk to a woman? I read about the pinky gloves years ago, where two German dudes decided that periods are icky and women must wear gloves to handle their nether regions. Because we should totally be shamed for something the body naturally does, right? I don't think I need to elaborate on why this is totally offensive and tone deaf. And adding to the collection of misogynist products, we have Bic for her. Because how will us women with our dainty hands ever be able to use such manly stationery? Then there was also this ridiculous golf club that guys can pee into if they really needed to go in the middle of a game. But who wants to have to clean urine off their equipment? Also, I can't imagine you'd even be able to use it discreetly. Would you want to be conducting business with someone on the course and then shake their hands after they just touch themselves? Poor usability. My family actually had laser discs so we could sing along to karaoke, but the storage size was quite limited. You'd have to flip the disc to access the rest of the content, which you can imagine would be pretty annoying if you were in the middle of a movie. Plus, they just took up so much space that it was only a matter of time before DVDs took over. Alessi is usually known for making beautiful kitchen appliances, except this is an example where, unfortunately, the usability didn't quite match the aesthetics, as with the Philippi Stark Hot Berta. Users risk burning themselves because the handle was too close to the actual body and releases hot steam on one end. You also can't see how much water is actually inside the kettle, as it's not translucent and there's no lid. Maybe you can display it as a cool sculpture in your home? Poor learnability. The new spoon was more environmentally friendly than plastic spoons, but users didn't know how to fold it properly in order to use it effectively. But I think that maybe if there were some adjustments to the design, like printing scoring lines on the spoon, it might have helped. Then there are items that have so many knobs and buttons that it discourages the end user from having to learn all of it. When was the last time you had to read an instruction manual in order to operate a remote and actually didn't mind doing it? If you've ever played on a Wii, you can thank the Nintendo Power Glove for its motion sensor technology, but by itself, the controls were too imprecise and difficult to learn, and therefore the product was deemed a failure. At least we eventually got Wii Tennis out of it. Right insight, wrong execution. When I watched football live, I remember missing the visual aid that broadcasts gave viewers by showing them where the field goal line was. So I can understand why the NHL Fox was developed, which tracks a fast-moving hockey puck as it glows on the ice. The product was scrapped because it was deemed too distracting, but it'd be pretty cool as an accessibility feature if some viewers can opt to turn on the visual aid for themselves if the tracker didn't actually light up by default in the puck. So the insight here is that sometimes it's hard to find the right fit for a condom, but I don't know if a latex spray can is the best way to go about it. Not only does it take forever to solidify, which immediately kills the mood, But it also seems like a tall order to ask anyone to spray something that could cause a chemical reaction on their genitals. There are lots of inventions these days for alleviating sedentary lifestyles, so I commend the hula chair for trying to give people an ab workout at their desk. But everyone who tried it at the museum laughed at each other and nearly fell off the chair, but not from laughing. So maybe it was too silly for the office, but who knows if something similar can pass for working from home. There was also an Austrian company that invented something called phone fingers, where you just cover your digits with latex so you don't get fingerprints all over your screen. It's a valid insight, but luckily these days we have a more elegant way to handle it with smudgeless screen protectors. They're not perfect, but still way less cumbersome than phone fingers. Today, if you have an iPhone, you can load your credit cards in there so you don't have to carry them around. Before that, Coin also came across the same insight. Unfortunately, it only worked a fraction of the time, which is especially problematic when you're on the hook to pay for a service. It also relied on revenue from selling its device compared to Apple Pay, which charges merchants a fee like any other credit card company. It also wasn't able to support cards with chips, which many businesses were starting to require at the time. No one asked for this, or poor product market fit. Why do air fresheners need to be placed inside a device that looks like a CD player but doesn't actually play music? That is a question that Scent Stories, and maybe also Shania Twain, didn't seem to have asked before giving this the green light. When I watched the first Avatar film in theaters, the 3D experience was so dizzying that I vowed never to pay extra to watch a 3D film again. Apparently I wasn't alone in thinking this, because 3D TVs also never took off. But one of the biggest contributors was that you have to buy special uncomfortable glasses in order to see the effect. We actually had one of these Amazon Dash buttons when it came out with the intention of hacking it for home automation. But that probably already spells disaster because Amazon had actually released it in the hopes of making it easier for customers to repurchase common goods like detergent and pet food. But people buy lots of stuff on Amazon. Most do not want a physical button stuck to different places around the house for individual brands and products. Plus, you couldn't see important information like shipping times and price changes. That review page in e-commerce is there for a reason. Privacy. Especially in today's day and age where data is currency, protecting user privacy is even more of a hot topic. It's no wonder that this internet-connected doll, My Friend Kayla, which sent recordings back to the company, were pulled from the shelves, especially after it started advertising other products to kids. And I'm sure most people wouldn't want their settings used for sex toys stored by the seller either, as was the case with the WeVibe vibrator. Then there's the famous case of Google Glass. It was plagued by a number of issues, including how many people thought they looked dorky, but there were also privacy concerns. Some businesses wouldn't admit potential customers in if they wore the glasses, and of course you have to remove them in public restrooms because no one wants to risk getting their picture taken there. Novelty. Apparently the Heinz Easy Squirt was really popular with kids, and it came in all sorts of non-typical ketchup flavors like purple, green, and blue. But eventually the novelty wore off and parents became more concerned with the excessive use of food coloring too. And do kids really find blue hot dogs appetizing? Dunno. The Snapchat spectacles were another item that was hugely popular at first, as there were long lines to pick some up from the vending machines that were scattered about. But it took the company way too long to release it widely. After a 5-month delay and without any influencers to help promote it, it was no longer perceived as cool. Probably not that surprising considering the short video format the company is known for. Its audience is not recognized for their long attention span after all. Similarly, the Twitter phone is also very singularly focused, but you think that if it had only one job, it should do well, right? Not exactly. Despite knowing what the character limit is for tweets, the screen doesn't even show the entire thing and ends up truncating them. Not to mention, it was bound to be replaced by a smartphone which can let you tweet and a whole lot more without having to pay over $100 for a dedicated tweeting device. There was an entire wall dedicated to Oreo flavors that have come and gone throughout the years. Food science is such a fascinating area of product design. I don't know enough to speak on why those flopped, but I guess that some of these flavors just didn't see enough demand. It's amazing that they actually went into production though. I guess they have a lot of cash to burn. Personally, I still prefer the classic. Too expensive. This one's pretty straightforward. Price drives a lot of consumer behavior, and sometimes even the brand and the aesthetics are not enough to sway them. The Keurig cold drink maker was essentially like a soda stream, except each pod costs 5 times as much as what you normally pay for at the supermarket. I wonder if the Coke and coffee flavors ever mixed. Visitors can also leave a post-it documenting on their own failures. Some of them were pretty funny, but a common theme that I noticed were past relationships and not finding the courage to do something that they've always wanted to try sooner. Of course, even after seeing so many product failures throughout history and learning from them, it's hard to predict what will succeed and what will bomb. Humans can and will surprise you, but that's not to say we can't still do our due diligence and carefully vet and test our ideas before launch to mitigate risk. Alright, that's all for today. Until next time.